Good afternoon, everyone. House Taxation Committee will come to order. First item of business will be requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? Seeing none, things must be getting a little quiet. So our first item of business for today is a hearing on House Bill 2721. And I would first turn to the reviser for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2721 would provide a sales tax exemption for the sales of over-the-counter drugs. Under the bill, over-the-counter drugs is defined, it's linked to what the current definition of over-the-counter drug is in a different section, which is 793602, the definition section. And that would mean a drug that contains a label that identifies the product as a drug as required by 21 CFR 201.66, which is the federal reg. And that the over-the-counter drug label includes a drug facts panel or a statement of the active ingredients with a list of those ingredients contained in the compound, substance, or preparation, but does not include grooming and hygiene products such as soaps, cleaning solutions, shampoo, toothpaste, antiperspirants, and suntan lotions or sunscreens. As I stated, the CFR reference, the Code of Federal Regulations, that's the regulations that deals with the format and content requirements for over-the-counter drug product labeling at the federal level. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sievers. The federal code that you refer to, that's just the code that requires the identification. There's no definition in that federal code, is there?
It took me a little bit. You are correct. That section itself does not define drug. It's defined downstream from there in a different section. It's actually 21 CFR 314.3. And it's really, I think, drug substance is an active ingredient that is intended to furnish pharmacological activity or other direct effect in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, or to affect the structure of any function of the body, but does not include intermediates used in the synthesis of such ingredient.
Thank you. Committee, are there any other questions for the reviser? Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's late in the afternoon. You went real fast. What is not covered by this? You went through a list.
Like I can't really say what's not covered. It's essentially over-the-counter drugs
you mentioned antiperspirants and some other things.
Those items. Yes, sorry. Over-the-counter drugs, and this is does not include grooming and hygiene products such as soaps, cleaning solutions, shampoo, toothpaste, antiperspirants, and suntan lotions and sunscreens.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think we've got another bill that might address those, though. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just dying to ask this. Is this going to cover CBD? Is it going to be tax-free also?
I'm not familiar enough to know if they would qualify.
It has some medicinal effect. I mean, but it's not. It's it's sold differently than in a pharmaceutical.
I'm not sure.
You want to get back to me on that, or
probably need some clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for that overview. Now we will turn to Department of Revenue for an overview of the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Kansas Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue estimates that House Bill 2721 would decrease state revenues by approximately $20.5 million in fiscal year 2023. In order to come up with that estimate, we reviewed consumer data and national retail sales statistics to come up with that estimate.
Committee, are there any questions for Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. Okay, committee, at this time we'll open up our proponent section of our testimony and welcome to committee Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I've talked to a whole number of doctors, pharmacists, grocers about this bill, and that's what prompted me to have it written. This would be good for Kansas in two different ways, from a humanitarian standpoint and from an economic standpoint. And right now, from an economic standpoint, it will make Kansas much more competitive with surrounding states when it comes to the sale of over-the-counter medications. And it will provide an incentive for Kansas consumers who may presently buy over-the-counter medications in neighboring states to remain in Kansas to make those purchases. And that's especially going to be relevant, I think, on the eastern border of the state, where we have to compete with Kansas City, Missouri on just about everything from Johnson, Wyandotte County. And something like 65% of the population of Kansas lives within 60 minutes of Kansas City, Missouri. So I know a lot of people who they just go over to Costco or some other store in Kansas City, Missouri, where they charge lower sales tax on food, on medications, and all that sort of thing right now. This would allow us to not only compete but beat Missouri as far as being an attractive place to buy food and medications. And I know right now, I checked with the Missouri Department of Revenue. Missouri charges 4.225% on food and over-the-counter medications. That is, unless you can prove that you are totally disabled, and then they lower that, I believe, to 1.225%. So a lot of people I know, if they're on the Missouri side and they stop for gas, if they happen to be at, again, someplace like Costco, they stop and get food and stuff there too. So I think two of the best bills that would maybe come out of the legislature this year are going to come out of this committee, and it's how we deal with sales tax on food and sales tax on over-the-counter medications. I talked with a lot of doctors about this, and they informed me, they said, well, you know, we have patients that come in and we don't necessarily have to give them prescription medications. We sometimes refer them to over-the-counter medications to deal with ailments that they may have. And so, again, it's another incentive to buy your medications in Kansas rather than going across state lines if doctors are recommending that. And it will be a lot of, this is, to me, kind of a mini Medicaid expansion bill, in the fact that we have a lot of people that fall into the category of not being able to afford to go to the doctor or buy prescription medications. And if all they can afford is over-the-counter medications, I don't see why we would penalize them with the sales tax on that when we don't penalize them with prescription medications. There's 0% sales tax on prescription medications in Kansas, and we still charge the full amount on over-the-counter medications. And to me, two things that we should not be charging anybody sales tax on is food and medications. So it should not significantly decrease state revenues, as consumers who save money on over-the-counter medications will most likely spend those savings on goods and services that are subject to sales tax in Kansas. So we still get a return on that money. And in summary, I would just say that passage of HB 2721 would make over-the-counter medications more affordable for all Kansans, and would make Kansas pharmacies and grocery stores more competitive with surrounding states. And that's extremely important for our side of the state, and I think extremely important for the economics of Kansas as we move forward here. So I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative. I have a couple of questions to start off with. You referenced Missouri. Did you do any other research, or perhaps Eddie can answer that? Do we have any other neighboring states that are all the way to zero, that fully exempt over-the-counter?
Over-the-counter? No. This would be actually Kansas leading the way in something. I think there were two other states that had lowered over-the-counter cost if you could prove that you were totally disabled. But most states do charge sales tax on over-the-counter medications. And that's one of the reasons why it would put Kansas at an advantage if we took it off.
Okay. Eddie, did you have? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Federation of Tax Administrators keeps kind of a database of state sales taxes, including their tax rates and obviously some major exemptions. And there are 10 states that do exempt non-prescription drugs. Of those states, the 45 states that do have sales taxes. And those 10, it looks to me, are Florida, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, and then also the District of Columbia does.
Thank you.
Yeah. It was tough to get that information. I called Florida about that. I talked to 3 different people in the revenue department, got 3 different answers. So, but Missouri is definitely, I think, the one state that we compete against more than any other. As far as business going, either staying in Kansas or going to Missouri. So,
okay, thank you. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the spirit of this bill. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's mini Medicaid expansion, but in light of that, I just want to say, did you consider graded going down over 2 or 3 years rather than going to 0% now? I mean, was that a consideration? And just wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Well, I think as soon as we can, if we could make kind of a dramatic move in this area, I think it would help us advertise that in Johnson County, Wyandotte County, the eastern part of the state that has to compete with Missouri. And I told my wife over the weekend, I cannot believe how many times I use the 2 words only and millions in the same sentence up here. But it's 21 or $20.5 million. And so, I mean, it's not a horribly expensive bill, but I think it would be better actually if we tried to do it at one point and made a point of it with our consumers in Johnson, Wyandotte County. Yeah.
Representative Corbett.
I kind of like the way you're thinking on this. I've got a House Bill 2484. It eliminates sales tax to 0. It eliminates no sales tax on your dinners you have in your bordering states. And then you throw in your drug bill. I think people will just stay around that Johnson County border and never leave. I think that'd be a perfect combo. No sales tax on your food, on the food you eat, and the prescription drug that you buy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be really important that, I mean, that's a big issue on the eastern side of the state, is how do we keep people in Kansas and keep them buying their food and their medications here in Kansas? And I think this would certainly address the medications part.
Thank you, Representative Miller, and welcome to Tax Committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of like where you're going with this. Sounds a lot like exempting hygiene product.
Thank you for your comments.
You may want to kick this over to any MD in the room, but can you tell me, can you give me an example of an over-the-counter medication that someone purchases in lieu of being able to afford a prescription drug?
Maybe John could, or Representative Epley could answer that better than I could, but I'm thinking like analgesics, things like naproxen, pain relievers, arthritis medicines.
Representative Epley.
Probably the biggest one would probably be acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, and naproxen would be right up there, and a lot of your anti-inflammatory drugs that are over the counter now. I mean, it's a huge business for a lot of people. They take those long before they come to me, or when they come into my office or the ER with a GI bleed. That's when we see them after they've taken them over the counters. But you know, if they're 0 tax, I think it'd be fantastic.
Thank you both.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing this. So I think the spirit, part of the spirit of the bill is to make our border retailers more competitive with the Missouri side. We've kind of tried to quit stealing each other's industries.
Right.
But I think consumers are fair game, and we've lost that game to Missouri for a long time. They have alcohol in their grocery stores, which everybody's still a little salty about that. And they charge different. Missouri just has a lower standard of living over there. But hopefully this bill will get through, and we'll be able to give us a leg up with our retailers over there on the border and help keep Kansans home and bring some Missouri people over here to shop for a change instead of going the other way. So
That's the hope.
thank you.
Committee, any further questions? If not, I just have a couple comments I wanted to make. You know, we have a $20 million fiscal note. It's just $20 million. But, you know, we also can't quantify very easily the amount of money that this could save, either in prevented doctor visits or prevented emergency room visits, things of that nature too.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to share a little story I had last weekend. I was out checking my cows out in western Kansas, and I was out in God's country, you know, and I was up on a hill and I actually bumped into God, and I had a question for him. I said, God, how much is $1 million to you? He said, it's just a penny.
Yeah.
And I said, God, how long is a million years? He said, just a second.
Yeah.
I said, God, could I have $1 million? And he said, sure, just a second. So, please, somebody else, any question? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Stephen Wright.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is anyone else wanting to appear on behalf of House Bill 2721? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2721 and move on to our next item, which is hearing on House Bill 2724. And we would turn to the revisor's office for an overview on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2724 would exclude the 20 mil statutorily imposed that goes to finance education from the calculation when determining the revenue neutral rate for when it's used to for a school district in order to exceed the revenue neutral rate when levying property taxes. So essentially the 20 mils would not be part of that analysis. And also this provision would apply for tax year 2022 and thereafter. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sievers. I think I'll take this opportunity to accept full responsibility for this. Last year when we ran Senate Bill 13, it was not my intention to include this. The 20 mils is unique because it is a locally levied tax, but it's defined in statute. It was not my intention to have the locals penalized to, you know, if they're going to see an increase in valuation to on that 20 mils, there's nothing they can do to change that 20 mil levy. So that's the reason for this bill today, and see if there's any questions from the committee. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question is, do we have any idea, and it's probably still early, but what the valuation increases are going to be throughout the state on property tax this year? Have we seen any kind of a number estimate?
You've probably gotten a statement on your own house or your own
I'm
property.
homeless.
But
I sold my house. I found a sucker. I'm homeless, houseless, and even sold my lawnmower. So, yeah, but I just wondered what, I know I'm getting some phone calls from people and that are concerned about their valuation going up. And I said, well, it's better than you had before where it went down and you couldn't sell your house anyway. So,
yeah, I'm not sure if we have a total statewide
Okay.
valuation.
I'd like that
yet.
if it becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, how does this affect then the calculation? Because it'll show a drop in their mill levy. Will they be able to compare this year to next year? And does the bill explain that?
I think I understand the question. So we're taking out the 20 mils for 2022. I'm trying to work my way through this quickly. I probably need to think about that a little bit and get back to you, but there might be a little.
The representative, I might try to take a stab at this. The change in the amount of money that the 20 mills would bring in, if that is more than it was the year prior, that would trigger the notification and the hearing part of what we had in Senate Bill 13. It's just my intention to not have that trigger. You know, if they still adjust their LOB or any other county, city, any of the other tax districts, adjust that, it would trigger a hearing.
But once you take the 20 out, they're comparing last year's to this year's when they're sending out. And so the 20 is coming off, and so they're going to show a drop, right? Unless inflation and everything else goes way up.
Well, the way I understand it on the property tax, that 20 mills is a separate line item. It's considered separately from like the LOB and the different taxes that would be levied.
Okay.
And we might have some comfreys that would be able to address that question too.
Thank you.
But we can look into that further. Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, and maybe the chairman can answer, and maybe I'm just wondering if this is by statute, state statute, the 20 mills. So would that be something similar to what we were dealing with on Washburn University, Mr. Chairman? Because wouldn't that by state statute, if I remember correctly, that we discussed last year when we were doing Senate Bill 13? Do you remember?
As I remember correctly, Washburn it has a limit. It can still adjust. It can actually change. They can change their mill levy. I may be mistaken, but I think they are set at a certain maximum ceiling that they can levy.
And that's in state statute?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
We may need some clarification on that for sure.
I recall the issue. I don't recall a lot of. I think that's probably true, but I need to look into that again.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, in the interest of time, unless Department of Revenue is just really wanting to get up, do we have any questions on the fiscal note? If there are none, we will move right on into our proponent testimony. If you're following along in your agenda, I'd like to move our final conferee, Dr. Michael Argabright, up to our first. It's my understanding that there's a board meeting happening this evening, and we'd like to get you on the road as soon as possible. So welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members. Want to clarify real quick, I am not from Missouri. I'm going to represent a little bit of a rural splash on this, and we appreciate the fact that you're bringing this up. It has caused some confusion with revenue neutral rate, and I think that concept has some validity and has helped in some hearings explaining some areas, but not on the 20 mil part of it. And just from a quick standpoint, grew up around big landowners, and I work with rural people right now and some business people. And the comment is, generally speaking, why are we talking about that when we don't have control over that? Which you kind of alluded to that a little bit. So I think that's probably the confusion part of it. The LOB and some of capital outlay and some of those other areas, it creates some good conversation. And talking about the dollar amount is more important than the levy, but the levy's how you get there. And I've been through a lot of hearings and budget hearings. It's spending time with people to explain that. So the 20 mills from a rural perspective, and I think you're going to hear it from others too, without a doubt, but it just causes some confusion because they don't have control over it. Representative Highland, I think to your question, it's there, it's still there, it's in our budget. They see those numbers. So we're not removing it, but we are, if this bill goes through, then we don't have to calculate that R&R on it. If that's helpful. I stand as a proponent for the bill, and thank you for considering that.
Okay. Committee, if you'll stand for questions, we'll go ahead and take questions now for you and get you on the road if there are any questions. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Now I'd like to welcome to committee Daniel Brungart.
Thank you for listening to me today. I'm not from Missouri, but I'm close. I'm from Wyandotte County. So I'm the superintendent of USD 204 Bonner Springs and Edwardsville. We're kind of an anomaly in the metro because we're one of the few school districts who've lost kids over the last 2 years. And that's in part due to the fact that we lost our builder. But also, if you remember last year, Wyandotte County, it was the only county in the state who kept us only at the 50% level of students for 3 weeks. So if you're one of those individuals who voted to allow school districts to be in control of how that's operated in the pandemic, I appreciate you a lot because that got all of our kids back in school. But because of that, our budget this year, because your school budget is based upon how many kids are enrolled in your school, we actually collected less taxes than the year before. And so we're not in a growth mode. But in that case, so on our revenue neutral rate, our supplemental general fund, we collected less taxes. In our bond and interest fund, we collected less taxes. In our capital outlay, we collected more because even though we're not a growing district by students, we are a growing district in valuation because I don't know if you've been by the casino. Probably none of you have been by the casino. But we have a big building being built there by Urban Outfitters. And it took an $800 piece of land, and it's going to make it $2.8 million over the next 10 years for our school district. So our valuation is growing up. Students are getting less. So our issue with this whole bill is the simple fact that if people would come to us and say, why are you raising more taxes? The only pitch point actually is the general fund. And it has not much to do with us. I mean, it's the simple answer is it's a state tax. And in regards to your question on the actual form that we use, that we publish, the general fund is in a separate line at the very top. And so that goes away. There's really no comparison to total mill levy. The nicest thing about the revenue neutral rate as a taxpayer is it doesn't really address mill levies because mill levies really does not represent my budget. My budget is how many dollars am I raising in taxes, and then that's turned into mill levy. So very few people understand that. So if you send out this information about tax dollars being raised, if we're raising more or less, that is really good information to give to your base. So I'm a proponent of getting rid of that. And for the main reason, I just think it muddies up what I would consider really good information you guys are trying to send to local taxpayers. And I think it'd be a good message. I'd stand for any questions.
Very good. Committee, are there any questions for this conferee? Seeing, oh, yes, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Brungart. I'm looking at your budget here and you and your bond and interest. Your dollar amount is going to be down about 400,000. Are you, and you did drop the mill levy. Is that going to be sufficient to cover your payments? Is that?
Yeah. So we passed a bond issue about 3 years ago, and we passed it on the fact the board passed it that we weren't going to actually raise our mill levy, and we haven't. We've decreased it mainly because our valuation continues to go up. I bought a house 2 years ago, a different house, and in Bonner, and my neighbor's house is now selling for 80,000 more. So as valuation goes up, that's just going to continue to drop. And that is set by the local taxpayers, but yeah, not everybody in the state has that opportunity, but we do, and it's much appreciated.
But your dollar amount went down about $400,000, though. I mean, that you're still able to meet your bond obligations with that.
So it has to do with the slope of our payments.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony. Next, I'd like to welcome Frank Harwood.
Chairman Smith and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me a time to testify in support of HB 2724. I'm the superintendent of USD 232 in DeSoto, so it'll be a little bit different perspective in that we are a growing district. And so one of the things, as Chairman Smith talked about before, the 20 mil levy is required. We don't have any choice but to levy that. And so if Senate Bill 13, which I actually testified against last year, was put in place in order to help local taxpayers understand local levies, then the 20 mil levy doesn't belong in that. And so the DeSoto School District this year has 6 different levies that the school board put in place. 5 of them, they actually have control of setting the rate. The 20 mils, they have no control of setting the rate. And so anybody whose valuations are increasing, and if you look at housing rates across the state, but especially we're looking at about a 15% valuation increase, that number will always go up. As Mr. Brungard talked about, when we publish our budget, because one of the reasons I testified against Senate Bill 13 was we were already publishing the budget and having a hearing, and people had plenty of opportunity to see that and move forward. I probably understand better now that Senate Bill 13, the idea behind that is that if you take all of the taxing entities and put them together, that does help the taxpayer see the overall version, whereas each of us doing it separately. So I understand why that is important and move forward. But the 20 mils, if there's going to be a hearing about the 20 mils, it should happen at the legislative level, which it does every other year when you extend it. One of the things I would say is that, and as Mr. Brungard started with, our levies work a little differently. We have 2 levies that actually you set a levy and then you get the dollars that comes up with. That's the 20 mils and then capital outlay, which is capped at 8 mils. All of our other levies are based on an amount of money that we're trying to raise based on a calculation through the school finance formula that turns into a mill levy. And so if you are a growing district with students and with valuation, our mill levies will go down, but we will continue to raise more dollars. And so with all but the 20 mills, we would continue to have a revenue neutral hearing because we would be raising more dollars. We could, if we chose to, affect the other 5 levies and keep them revenue neutral. And in our case, that's probably unlikely because as you get more students, your budget goes up. So LOB goes up, cost of living goes up. And so those are all going to be there. But if we were a district that didn't have a growing enrollment, you could make some choices and make some changes to levy so that it wasn't revenue neutral, or so that all the rest of them were revenue neutral. But if the 20 mils goes up, you have to have the hearing. And in 2 years, you also have to pay for part of the mailing. Whereas if you made that choice when the mailing becomes a local cost, you would have that increased cost as well, even if you were trying to avoid it. So for that reason, I'm in support of House Bill 2724, mostly for the points that the chair mentioned before, is that the local board has no authority not to levy the 20 mils, so it makes sense not to include it in the revenue neutral rate at the local level. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Blacks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. And as you probably are aware, as legislatures, we're under some horrific pressure for transparency in everything, which was part of that bill last year. If we take this bill and this 20 mils goes away, and clarify for me, that'll take care of the problem for the next year, but in succeeding years, would as your mill levy and everything and valuations go up, or your valuations go up, then you're going to be right back in the same boat, aren't you, or not? Maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
So this past year, with Senate Bill 13 passing, we had to calculate the revenue neutral rate. We did not, the mailings did not go out last year. They'll go out this year. But every year, and this is, we were required to, and I can get these for you, to publish what's called Code 99, which is all of our valuations and all of our levies for the last 3 years. Okay. So every year we publish for our taxpayers our levies in each area for the last 3 years, and we already had to have a hearing about that. So what Senate Bill 13 did is that now there's another piece that we publish that just talks about if you were collecting the same amount of tax what would the new mill levy have to be? And if we're going to exceed it, we have to let the county clerk know that so that they can publish that. And we publish one more document, and we actually still have the same hearing. So that if by removing the 20 mills, it would still show up on our budget, but it wouldn't show up on the revenue neutral part, but all of our other levies would.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
At least that's the way I understand the bill. Yeah.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And our final conferee as a proponent is Jim Colskin. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think you did. Committee, I did write proponent testimony based on the experience from the three members that spoke before. I need not really, because I'll say the same thing they said. We support it. I'm representing United School Administrators and Schools for Quality Education. And the three that spoke, they express it very well. They're practicing superintendents currently, and I support what they say. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. It's good to be back in the old Supreme Court room.
Welcome back. Committee, are there any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. I did have a question for the reviser right quick. Perhaps I should have asked this earlier. I apologize, but as I read the bill, the amendment or the change that this makes to the statute, the 20 mills will still be included on the statement. It just will not trigger the requirement for a hearing if that's the only the mailing. And I can follow up with you.
Yeah, I'll need to look into that one.
Okay. Because I did still want that to be on the information that's provided to the taxpayer so they could see what that 20 mills is doing at the state level. But we can follow up later on that. Committee, I do have one opponent testimony. I'd like to welcome to committee Dave Traubert.
Thank you. Dave Traubert, CEO, Kansas Policy Institute. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to start with some good news. The bill that you passed last year is saving a lot of taxpayers a lot of money. We haven't published this yet, but we do have the data from the Department of Revenue. There are 20 counties in Kansas, roughly 20, where the actual dollar amount of property taxes collected for education declined. And even better, there are about 40 counties where all the local government property taxes within the county collectively declined. That's the power of transparency. And you're really to be congratulated for giving taxpayers that transparency. We had a lot of questions come up from local government officials and from taxpayers, frankly. We didn't get one question on this 20 mil issue from taxpayers. Not one. We oppose this because I think inadvertently this creates perhaps a different kind of confusion. And there's a table in my testimony that demonstrates how that would work. So there are revenue neutral rates and proposed rates for general, supplemental general, capital, and bonds. With the general mills, the 20 mills included, the total is going from 62 mills to 65. That's a 4.8% increase. If you just take the 20 mills out and leave everything else the same, it's a 7.1% increase. It is giving the impression that the district is actually raising taxes more than they really are. Here's another type of confusion. You're going to get a revenue neutral notice that is going to show, if this passes, generally three types of taxes. But then when your property tax bill comes, there's 4. That's going to cause a different kind of confusion. And so while we understand that there was some confusion on why do we have to do this, it worked. There were no issues that we're aware of other than perhaps within the school district. But this has worked well, and we fear that it could lead to some other confusion. We studied this pretty carefully. We did the open records request in all 105 counties to find out what every entity was doing. And then we followed up to find out what they finally approved and how that compared. There are no school districts where there wouldn't have still been a revenue neutral hearing without this 20 mil in there. Just wouldn't have happened. So you're not cutting down on mailings. You're not cutting down on hearings, but you're kind of trading one level of confusion for another. And with that, I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Miller?
It's not really a question, and conceding that I'm new to the committee, I'm confused by the testimony, and that Dr. Argabright says passage of this bill will assist us in less confusion, and Mr. Trobert says it will result in more confusion, so I'm confused.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trobert, I'm looking at your table, and your term general of that, is that applying to the 20 mils?
Yes, that's considered the general fund. That's how it shows up on the revenue neutral rate notice. So there's general fund, which is 20, supplemental general, capital outlay, and bonds. There's a few others in a few districts, but these are the four that are most commonly used.
And the 19.5, that's the calculation that would keep it at revenue neutral. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So for example, if the valuations went up about 2.6%, then that 20 mils, the revenue neutral, would be 19.5.
Okay, thank you.
As those are split up, and I appreciate your chart here, I should have analyzed that a little bit more before the meeting. It was my intention to leave that 20 mils on the information, so it would not indeed show. When you got that notification, you'd have three different tax rates or line items, and then when you got your tax bill, you'd have four. It's always been my understanding that tax notification would almost be identical to what it's essentially an estimate of what your tax would be. So if we make sure that is included, that was my question with the revisor, and we might need to clarify that. Would that not eliminate some of the confusion? I still understand that, if the revenue neutral rate for the 20 mils does show that it goes down, but then it increases in other areas, it is a tax increase because the 20 mils doesn't in fact go down.
I don't think that would help any, because if it's on there, what's going to be in the revenue neutral rate column? So in order to have apples to apples, if you're going to show 20 mils in the proposed, you're going to have to show something in the revenue neutral column. And if it's not revenue neutral, then it's inaccurate and it's giving a false impression. If you put it in there and say they don't have to talk about it, that's a different kind of confusion. What might get at what you're trying to accomplish, Mr. Chairman, is if this bill said if there would be no revenue neutral hearing but for the 20 mils, then there need not be a hearing.
Which is essentially what I was trying to do. I just didn't want the situation to occur where that 20 mils that they'd have no control over would trigger a mailing and cost basically more expense.
So just have that exception.
Okay.
Would take care of it.
Very good. Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Committee, that concludes our business, unless there's anyone else that I missed on House Bill 2724. Seeing none, we'll close the hearing, and that concludes our business. Tomorrow, I did plan on working a couple of small bills, but this is one of them. But I'm going to be visiting with the reviser on an amendment, so I think we will take tomorrow off, and there will be no tax tomorrow. We'll get. Well, if you want to show up, I'm sure Jim can invite everybody over. Yes, the other item you should have received via email. A list of all of the sales tax exemption requests that we've had this year. That was compiled by Legislative Research just so you could have them all in one place. I would appreciate it if you have one of those that you feel strongly about and you want us to work and consider. Come visit with me, and I'll leave it to the will of the committee body on which one of those move forward and which ones might leave alone. Representative Helgerson. Only. Probably.
No problem. If you don't. Well.
Any other questions or anything for the best good of the committee? Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you all want to show up tomorrow, we can work this list. But
thank you. Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you.